Past paper questions. Everyone's used them and they're definitely a really good way to help you prepare for exams and do better in all your subjects. But there's definitely a way to go about using them and a way to extract as much value from them as possible. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Jakaria and I'm a student studying in London. And in this video, I'm going to be going through the most effective ways to go about using past paper questions to help you do as well as you can. These are going to be methods that I personally have used and I think are super effective. So if you do find them useful or helpful in any way, then leave a like and subscribe and let me know what you thought about the video. As usual, timestamps will be in the description below so you can jump around and find exactly what you're looking for without wasting any time. The first thing I want to say with regards to using past paper questions is that you need to mark them, and you need to mark them as harshly as possible. When doing past paper questions, the real value you gain from them is when you actually go through your answers and mark them using the official mark schemes. I think this is where a lot of learning can happen and where you can make sure that your answers are as specific as possible and are what the exam board you're doing are looking for. Another really important thing is to mark as harshly as possible. I think a lot of people sometimes become a bit lenient when they mark their own papers, but I think marking as harshly as possible can give you a lot of useful information. Firstly, it will give you the worst case scenario had you written that actual answer in the exam. What I mean by this is when your teachers or examiners are marking your exam papers, you could either get a really lenient examiner or you could get a really harsh examiner. This is something you just can't control and it's sadly just down to luck. Some examiners or teachers are quite lenient when they mark and others are a lot more strict. But by being as strict as you possibly can when you are doing your exam questions on your own, it means you essentially get the worst case scenario where if you did get a really strict examiner marking your paper, then this is technically the lowest mark you could possibly get. I think a lot of people need to understand that there's nothing wrong with making mistakes, and it's a lot better to make mistakes when you're doing the questions on your own rather than in the actual exam. So definitely mark as harshly as possible. Another thing with marking really harshly is you're probably more likely to remember any small mistakes you make, because you'll remember marking it and you'll remember not giving yourself the mark. Whereas you're really lenient about it and you give yourself the mark, then there's a high chance you'll write the same answer in your actual exam if a similar question came up, and it could be that your teacher decides that you haven't actually earned the mark and then you lose out on some really easy marks. The next thing I want to recommend is to do some of your past paper questions under timed conditions. Past paper questions and exam style questions are really useful for helping you understand content and seeing what you need to work on, but it's also a really good way to get you exam ready. You could know all the content you need for your syllabus, but if you don't finish your exam on time, then you're just losing out on a lot of simple marks. I know there are a lot of students out there who are really smart and who have revised really hard and have understood all the content, but they just don't give themselves enough time throughout the exams, or they don't pace themselves well enough to the point where they reach the end of the exam and they've run out of time. Now, you don't have to do every exam question you do under exam condition and with the exam timing, but it is worth spending some time in your revision schedule to answer some of the questions under exam condition and with exam timing. This is especially the case if you're doing essay-based subjects. For me, I did A-level psychology and this was very essay heavy, and for this reason I needed to make sure my timing was exactly on point and as perfect as it could be, because otherwise I'd risk losing out on a lot of questions at the end because of how long they were. A really easy way to understand how long you should spend per mark is to bring up an exam paper for the subject you're sitting. So for example, if you're doing A-level biology, then bring up a biology paper. If you're doing A-level psychology, bring up a psychology paper, etc. And all you have to do is look at the total number of marks and the amount of time you're given in minutes. And the simple calculation you need to do is take the amount of minutes you're given in an exam. So for example, if it's a 2-hour exam, then 120 minutes, and simply divide the time in minutes by the number of marks in that paper, and that way you'll get a number that shows you how much minutes you should spend per mark in the exam that you're sitting. If I use my own case as an example, I did A-level psychology like I mentioned, and I'll put a picture on the screen right now of an A-level psychology paper, and as you can see, the paper is 96 marks and I'm given 120 minutes to complete it. So if I do the same calculation I just mentioned before, if I do 128 divided by 96, then I'll see that I have roughly 1.25 minutes per mark in the exam. And so that means that when I'm doing my own exam practice in my own time, if for example I'm doing a 16 mark question, then all I'll have to do is take 16 and times it by 1.25, or essentially the marks in the question times the amount of minutes per mark that I should be spending. And that way I can time myself while I'm doing that 16 marker, rather than giving myself infinite amount of time and it not being as realistic as what would happen in the actual exam. Essentially, time yourself so that in the exam you don't run out of time, because that's the worst thing that can happen to you. Especially if you look through the questions afterwards and you realize that you knew all the content, you just ran out of time, which is genuinely one of the worst feelings ever. The third tip, and something that I think is really important, is to keep track and make note of any specific keywords that you see in a mark scheme. A lot of the times mark schemes are really annoying in that you can understand the content to a really good degree and you can know exactly what to write, but when you go over to mark your work, you don't actually get any of the marks because the mark scheme was looking for very specific keywords or sentences that you needed to include. I know for me personally, this was especially the case for A-level biology, where I felt like I understood all the content, but I just wasn't getting the marks that I wanted to in the exams that I was sitting, simply because I kept missing out certain keywords or just certain concepts that they were looking for. And I think mark schemes can be really annoying like that, but you can really easily get around it if you look out for any specific keywords or you make note of them as you're marking your work. I think this is a really common mistake that a lot of students make. A lot of students lose out their marks not because they haven't understood or learnt the content, but because they missed out very small keywords. And that can be a big difference, especially when you're on the borderline between grade boundaries and you really want to push for the higher grades. It's really crucial that you know what keywords to use. It can be really simple things, like for example in biology you could get a question about diffusion and they're looking for the keyword being concentration gradient, but in your answer you describe what a concentration gradient is, but you forget to specifically mention the words concentration gradient. Now this sounds really harsh, but this is actually quite common, and I know me personally, I fell victim to this a lot, where I understood all the concepts and I was describing it perfectly, but I'd lose out the marks because I simply didn't name the concept or put the correct keyword. Now when you do identify these keywords, it's also very important that you go through your notes, your flashcards, whatever you use to revise, and straight away just update those keywords and make sure that they're in your notes. The last thing you want to do is internalize an answer or a concept but not memorize the keywords along with it, because then when it comes to the exam you'll be more inclined to write it how you wrote in your notes, and if you haven't added all those important keywords into your notes or flashcards, then you risk losing out on a lot of marks. Another really important thing, and I think something that not many people might think to do, but I feel like is really crucial, is to look out for reoccurring questions. What I mean by this is that exam boards, regardless of what subject you're doing, whether you're doing A-level or GCSE, have the ability to make up any question they want. However, there are always certain questions that seem to come up quite often, and I think this is important to know, because if you notice a certain question comes up a lot when you're doing exam practice or when you're going through past paper questions, it's really worth taking some time to look deeply into that question and understand the mark scheme completely. Because if that question does come up in your actual exam or in any mock exams you're doing, the last thing you want to do is kick yourself because you remember doing that question loads of times in the past, but you forgot to properly internalize the mark scheme or how the mark scheme works. A lot of the time when these reoccurring questions come up, the mark schemes are almost identical every time. And if you can learn the mark scheme, then you definitely save yourself a lot of trouble. One, you won't really have to try too hard to recall the content. And two, it's always nice when you see a question you've seen before, because it gives you that sense of security where you can almost guarantee that you've gotten most of, if not all, the marks for that question. I know this has happened to me a lot, especially with subjects like biology and chemistry, where there have been subjects that have constantly come up and I've just resorted to memorizing the mark scheme because I've noticed that they've come up a lot, and then when they come up in my actual exam, then it's a lot easier. Now this is especially common for definition questions, where you might be given a 1 or 2 or even a 3 mark question asking you to define a concept or a word. For example, with chemistry, when I was doing the enthalpy topic, I got a lot of questions on what is the definition of the enthalpy change of neutralization, or what is the enthalpy change of combustion, questions like that just kept coming up. And when I looked at the mark scheme, I realized that they were all asking for the same few bullet points or same few keywords. And so I just ended up memorizing it naturally, because I told myself that there's a high chance that these questions will come up, so I might as well make it a little easier for myself and memorize them. And the final bit of advice that I want to leave you guys with is to make use of your teachers and ask them as many questions as you can after you've done your exam questions. Bear in mind that your teachers are very proficient in how the exams work and what the exam boards are looking for, and they can really help you understand what the exam boards are looking for and what concepts or keywords you should include in your working out. It's also really useful for you if you do your exam questions maybe one evening and just make note of any topics you struggled with or any concepts you didn't understand, and then go to your teacher the next day and just ask them questions about whatever you are struggling with. I've said this in many videos in the past, but your teachers are more than happy to help you, and I can guarantee they won't mind giving you a few minutes of their time just going through a concept with you and just helping you understand it. If anything, a lot of teachers actually like students who take the initiative to do their own work and find their own weaknesses and then come back and ask them questions about it. Another reason this is really important is a lot of the times if you're doing an exam question and you look at the mark scheme and you've got it wrong, it can be hard to sometimes understand why you got it wrong, especially since a lot of mark schemes aren't super specific. They usually just give you a few bullet points on where the marks are and don't really explain why the marks are there, or they don't really explain the concepts in depth. This is something that your teachers can definitely help you with, and this is something that I definitely found was useful, especially for subjects like A-level maths, where sometimes the mark schemes tended to skip a lot of steps and it wasn't always clear where they were going with the method or the working out. And so when I went to my teachers the next day and just asked them, they were very helpful, and they'd always just go through the whole question and let me know step by step where the marks were allocated and how to go about answering the question. And that's about it on how you can utilize exam style questions and how you should be doing your exam style questions and past paper questions to get the most out of it and so that you can achieve the highest grade possible. If you did find this video helpful, then please do leave a like, subscribe, and comment below what you thought, or if you have any questions. It's been really cool to see the channel grow recently, and I hope that it continues happening. Also, let me know if there's any videos you want to see in the future. That's been all from me, and goodbye.